I have said from the beginning that NATO would not survive this war. Whenever this war ends, I think NATO will end. We are clearly in a very fragile economic position. We want to leave. We should have left Europe largely by the mid 1990s. And at the time, there were people in the Senate as well as in European capitals who were desperately searching for a reason to justify NATO and keep us tied down in Europe. They found it, they thought, in the Balkans. And we've been struggling with these kinds of stupid misadventures ever since. Remember, hubris and miscalculation also play a big role in all of this. Everybody miscalculated about Russia. Everybody miscalculated about ourselves. But the hubris remains. Nobody wants to admit anything has changed in the world. It's as simple as that. We're still see ourselves as the center of the universe. That's absurd. That's where we are. And there is nothing to stop Russia, unless you wanted to use a nuclear weapon, from settling the war on its own terms. And no one wants to risk the use of a nuclear weapon. Certainly nobody sane in Washington, and there's nobody I know in Moscow that wants to do that. So I think NATO will just collapse. Henry James said sacred cows are never slain, they simply vanish. I think that's what will happen with NATO. We'll wake up and it's effectively gone. I don't think the EU is going to make it either. And remember, and you're a European, the way the world looks from Oslo is very different from the way the world looks from Rome or Madrid or Athens. And trying to hold this conglomerate to get together is just an unrealistic expectation. It's unnatural. It's exclusively a product of the Cold War.
Well, on the topic of countries seeing the world in a different way, and also in the context of this of the 9th of May celebrations, I see that the defeat of fascism is used in different ways. I mean, in Europe, of course, we present Putin as the new Hitler constantly, but in Russia as well, they evidently link the current war, the proxy war with NATO, to this. To the Second World War as well, in terms of fighting fascism, and of course these huge Western forces, as it wasn't just Germany who invaded the Soviet Union, but more recently now as well, we saw the Chinese making a comment. Xi Jinping made a comment which appeared in Financial Times, where he compared the United States actions in the international system as well. He compared it to Hitler's armies. How do you see? Isn't this a very huge escalation in rhetoric, or do you see a possible like military alliance between the Chinese or Russians, or are they too averse to this, or well, what do you think these comments are attempting to achieve or legitimize, or is it just a lot of bluster and demonization?
Well, the Nazi nostalgia in Ukraine is real. The history of Ukraine is very complex. Millions of Ukrainians were murdered between 1929 and 1932 under Stalin, under communism. And the NKVD officers who carried it out went to the prisons to recruit people to help them do it. The Ukrainians have not forgotten that. And that was arguably a larger loss of life than we saw in the Holocaust with the Jews. Uh, these areas have long histories, long memories. So the Russians look at this, they see Nazi nostalgia and Nazi symbols, and they're horrified. For many of the Ukrainians, and let's be frank, for most of the people in Eastern Europe on any given day, if they had a choice between Nazism and communism, they did not choose communism. But that's not part of the narrative in the East. It's not the narrative in the West. It's really quite interesting. Uh, that's another subject. But the bottom line is that if you're trying to legitimate yourself, it's an easy target to say, well, they're Nazi-like. The truth is, if we're like anybody, we're like the British Empire. And if you're Chinese, you're worried about the South China Sea because one of the things that put China in a very difficult position strategically was the Royal Navy. that ran amok in the South China Sea and made it impossible for the Chinese to win the Opium Wars. Remember, the British went right in, sailed up the rivers, pounded the forts, and compelled the Chinese to allow the importation of opium and the exportation of opium. A terrible impact on the population and the people that lived there. The Chinese view Christianity differently. They had a man in the 1840s, 30s, and 40s who declared himself the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and led a civil war that took over 20 years to finally stop and killed millions and millions of Chinese. So the Chinese have a very different view of Christianity from what we understand. We don't bother to learn anything about this. And I simply think that Taiwan was the unsinkable aircraft carrier during World War II for the Imperial Japanese. China will not allow any foreign power to dominate Taiwan and use it again against China. It's that simple. We need to understand that and stop talking about Taiwan. I think all of these allusions to the past are done for reasons that have domestic roots in Russia and China and elsewhere, just as we use them. I would say that I wouldn't pay too much attention to them, but I would look at the results. And right now, I think Russia and China together, along with the growing BRICS collection, are people that have said, we've had enough of you, the United States, and your partners in the West. And the interesting thing to me is that, most of it, if you don't like us, the other people they don't like are the British and the French, probably to some extent the Belgians and maybe the Dutch. These are the colonial powers. The Germans came into that very, very late, and there was never much enthusiasm for it in Germany. The rest of Europe was not involved in that sort of thing. So you can't blanket say one way or the other. But as far as we're concerned, we are very much meddling everywhere in the world the way the British did. They meddled. They meddled on the continent. They meddled in Africa. They meddled in Asia. They meddled in India. That's not a good thing from the standpoint of all of the people that live in these areas. And it's in our best interest not to meddle. But we have built a system. We have built structures in this country to support and sustain meddling, to project meddling, to tinker with other people's societies. We all hoped that President Trump would take it on. Well, we were happy when the National Endowment for Education, or no, National Endowment for Democracy, and then, oh gosh, my brain's not working clearly. The various world agencies, help me out. I can't remember the damn acronym for it. But Elon Musk went into these things and discovered massive fraud. Thank God for Elon Musk, because that massive fraud was real. And the National Endowment for Democracy was another CIA front trying to destabilize other people's countries in the name of democracy. All this sort of thing needs to stop. And I think Donald Trump took some very good steps in that direction. But he's still dealing with the intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA. And the CIA is still a rogue organization. And I think he has to understand that. Again, President Trump has good intentions, but President Trump needs to focus here at home, not overseas. He needs to dismantle the meddling networks, the imperial structures. Those need to go away. But he really needs to focus here and understand what he's dealing with inside his own government. I think he has some understanding of it, but not as much as he needs. And he really needs to focus on it. But again, he's surrounded by people who are telling him different things. And he is unfortunately too easily influenced by too many of the wrong people.
Yeah. Just a very quick answer as we're running out of time. How do you see now the possibility of actually reaching a peace to end this end the proxy war in Ukraine? Do you think it's too late? It will be resolved on the battlefield, or because I saw
I
JD
think
Vance saying the Russians ask for too much.
uh,
So, But again, just pragmatically, it's the Russians that are holding the cards. If the Americans want to pressure someone, it would be easier to pressure the Europeans and the Ukrainians. But yeah, did you see any path to peace, or is it just going to end on
Well,
the
there's a
battlefield?
path to peace, but it's not going to be through Washington. And J.D. Vance doesn't understand the region and its history. So I don't know why he said that. The Russians have never asked for very much, but the more time has passed, the more blood that's being spilled, the more reason for the Russians to demand more territory as a means of protecting themselves. Uh, this is these conversations that happen in the United States are just uninformed. There's no real deep understanding of any of it. That's the problem. I don't know how you fix that. We do not have a core of professional diplomats that have spent their lives learning other languages, living in other countries, and understand all of these dynamics. What we do is we've bred a core of meddlers who think it's their God-given right to crusade for some notion of democracy, which is utter nonsense, and that has caused enormous trouble. You would have thought that the 10-year disaster in Vietnam would have sobered us up, but apparently it didn't. It's a self-perpetuating industry in this town or in Washington, D.C. So I think it will end, but it'll end on Russia's terms. We won't have much to do with it. But the Russians, again, Mr. Putin is not a stupid man. He knows that he inevitably, in order to have a solution that will work, will need others that border Russia to participate. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova. At some point, they will have to be brought in and sign on for whatever solution is reached. And I think he understands that. The bigger issue for us right now is clearly what's going on in the Middle East. And I think President Trump wants to avoid a war with Iran, no doubt in my mind. But can he? Because Mr. Netanyahu is desperately interested in a war because he sees this as the right time and the right opportunity because he has control of the House and the Senate in the United States, and he controls much of national policy. The fact that Donald Trump and he don't like each other doesn't really matter very much. Uh, Nobody likes Netanyahu. He's an arrogant sociopath. But the billionaires that constitute the backbone of AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, they have enormous power over the White House and President Trump. So let us say, what I worry about more than anything else is not that we will start a war with Iran, but perhaps Mr. Netanyahu marches quickly into Gaza to butcher the remainder of the population, and President Sisi in Egypt says we can't tolerate that and sends in the Egyptian army. He will probably be supported by the Jordanians. And then we will see this war spread. Iran has said it will stand by Egypt. What do the Saudis and the Emirates do? They're not going to sign on for the mass murder of the people in Gaza. So the real question at that point is, what do the Turks do? Erdogan has tried to play both sides to the middle. But when this commences against Egypt, if it happens, as I think it will, and the Israelis then go to war with Egypt, it will be impossible, I think, for the Turks to sit it out. I think that's when you get your regional war. Now, the other possibility is Mr. Netanyahu decides to simply attack Iran, period. Boom. That will start a regional war. But Mr. Netanyahu is fairly confident and probably is right to be confident that whatever he does, we will back him. That's the problem.
Like, I just got back from Iran this morning. I would love to speak with you about what's happening there, but I guess we're gonna have to do it some other day. So, yeah, thanks again.